Hey folks, so we are going to be working on block 5 today for our Hoop Sisters flower sampler bouquet. So we have two different layout options, of course. We have the 4-patch layout, and then we also have the on-point layout. So depending on which one you're doing will dictate how many pieces you need to have cut and what you will need to have on hand when you get started. So let's look at the the on point layout first and foremost. So first of all and foremost, we need to decide which size we're doing. Are we doing the 5? Are we doing the 8? Of course, you're going to keep doing the size that you have been doing from the beginning. You're going to want to get your fabric 1, your fabric 2, your fabric 3. If you are doing the optional backing, you're going to also want to have that on hand as well. So for the on-point layout, depending on what size you are doing, you are going to need 3 pieces according to which size you're using of your fabric 1, which is your background, and then 1 piece. I have 5 by 9, but if you're doing the 5-inch, you're going to need 3.5 by 6. Fabric 2, that is going to be here and here. You're going to need 1 piece according to which size you're using, and of course they have you a spot to place your swatch. Fabric 3, you're going to need 1 piece according to which size you're doing. And then your optional bag, again, according to which size you're doing. Fabric 3 is going to be your flower center. Fabric 2 is going to be your leaves. And as I said before, 1 is, of course, going to be your background. And I like that they put this here to show you just where your stitches are going to fall. Now, if we are doing the 4-patch layout, we are obviously going to have to kind of quadruple what we had before. So you're going to need 12 pieces of fabric 1 depending on which side you're using, and 4 pieces of the larger size. Same thing over here for fabric 2, you're going to need 4 pieces. And on fabric 3, you're going to need 4 pieces. And if you're doing the optional back, you're also going to need 4 pieces. So let's look at what we've got here. So I have my fabric 1, and then I've got my wonderful little fabric clips with my clip stickers on them to show me the different pieces, the number of the piece of fabric. So I've got my 3 small pieces per block, and then my larger piece. Then I've got my piece of fabric 2, and then I've got my piece of fabric 3. And then I have my batting. If you are doing optional wool batting, you will also need it to this size. So for the optional wool batting, it is, if you are doing the 8-inch size, it's 7 3/4 by 7 3/4. I just cut them 8 by 8. And if you're doing the 5-inch size, you're going to need 4 7/8 by 4 7/8. Again, I would just cut them 5 by 5. So this is the end result of our finished block. I think it turned out really cute. Makes me kind of think of a tulip. Very cute, very sweet. So you are going to do your quilting, of course. You're going to have a nice little run line through here. We were going to do an orange in there originally, and we decided to do purple just to kind of make it pop a little more. And then this stitch here and this stitch here I did in the green shade. So we are going to talk about the colors that you're going to need on hand. So you are not going to have a ton of color changes, but I chose to do this in purple, so that is $3.92. I have $9.83 for my greens, and then I've been using $165 for all of my quilting. And this again is all the exquisite thread that I have been using through the project. I'd also recommend having some embroidery tape on hand just to hold everything down, and a nice pair of scissors just to trim with as you go, and of course your instructions on hand, either printed out or on your smart device. I would recommend, if you have issues with flipping and folding and it's hurting your fingers, or you don't have a lot of dexterity to do the press overs with your hands, I like a roll and press and a fabric folding pin. They are super great for stuff like that. Now, if you were using the battleizer, go ahead and have your battleizer hooped up. If you are not using battleizer and you're using the method that I'm doing, go ahead and get a piece of no-show mesh in your hoop. So bear with me as I gather all of my supplies, and we will pivot over to the machine where I already have our design loaded up. So give me just a second to move all of my goodies over to the machine. So we're also going to move the camera, so bear with me as I readjust. Going from one space to the next. It's a process. So here on the screen, I have pulled up the block, and of course I'm doing the 8-inch size, which is really roughly more like 7 3/4 by 7 3/4. So as long as you have an 8-inch hoop, that's what's going to work for you. I'd recommend going ahead and threading your machine with your neutral color. That's what I did for all of my flip and folds. It just makes life a lot easier. So I am putting on ES 165 real quick. That's what I'm going to start with, and that's what I'm going to do the majority thereof. So in the bobbin, I have a regular embroidery brand, regular sewing bobbin. If you are switching between the Vanish lights in the machine and in the needle, in the bobbin case and the needle I should say, I'd recommend going ahead and watching the instructions carefully, because they want you to go ahead and place water soluble thread in the needle and in the embroidery bobbin for this placement step. So if you were wanting to do that, go ahead and have that ready to go. I, however, am using regular sewing thread and embroidery bobbin through the entire process. So keep that in mind. I try to mention those as I go, but it is very clearly listed in your instructions. So without further ado, we're just going to sew machine stitch step 1 on to our stabilizer. And again, if you have battleizer in the hoop, you are going to do the same thing. You're going to sew it directly onto the fabric. This is going to give you the placement stitch for your batting or optional wool. Okay. Again, if you are going to be using the optional wool, you'll want to leave in the water soluble if that is what you are choosing to do. And it will do a heavy zigzag stitch all the way around it to tack it down. And they actually, if you're using wool and you're using battleizer both, they actually recommend raising your embroidery foot height just to kind of hold it down. I'm going to go ahead and do the zigzag stitch. You can repeat step 1 just to tack it down if you're just using batting. But I do like to, and I normally skip this step, which is machine stitch step 2, because it is not what I usually prefer, but I do like to show it off in some videos just so you guys can see what that looks like. Now, if you're doing the optional wool or the batting like I am, you're going to want to trim your batting close to the stitch line as soon as it's done. I do, like I said, prefer the straight stitch. So normally I repeat machine stitch step 1 and then I skip over machine stitch step 2 for the method that I'm using, which again is with no-show mesh and my battings. It's a great way to use up your leftover battings. I've been using a blend of 100% cotton and cotton poly, so it's a great way to bust through your stash because you're only going to need a big piece kind of towards the end if you're going to do the additional optional piece of batting in the back. And we'll talk about that later on. I also have recently got our Gather Your Supplies video together, so if you have not watched that yet, I would recommend going and watching that. It is the best video to start with because it's just to talk about everything that you need. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to trim close. And one thing I haven't mentioned yet that I should have is that I always do my flip and folds and a lot of my in the hoop project type deals with a 9014 embroidery needle in my machine. I am working on the Brother Avenir today. It has a very nice large hoop space. When Lisa has been making these here in the store, she has been working with the Janome CM17 that also has a very nice large hoop space. We've been kind of dual machining it and get this done because we're making both layout samples and it's going great. We're having a good time on both. So nice big hoop machines are always fun to have. So I have a 9014. I think it is a Janome red tip that I have in right now, but a Schmetz 9014 embroidery needle will also work very well. So now that I have my batting tacked down and ready to go, we're ready for the next step, which is going to sew the initial outline of my blocks, my fabric block pieces, to be placed onto the batting. So we are going to hit start, we are going to sew, and that is going to stitch that outline for us. So if you had not already, you would want to go ahead and switch back from your Vanish light to your regular sewing thread and your bobbin. It does list that in the instructions that you would sew the outline pattern in the same thread, which is just going to be like your background color and your regular embroidery bobbin, because we want these stitches to hold. We don't want them to come out later. So definitely, before you sew machine stitch step 3, if you are a Vanish Light girly and you are switching back and forth with your bobbin and your basic sewing, switch your bobbin back to your regular embroidery bobbin and switch your top thread back to your background color, which in my case is the Exquisite ES 165, which is a 40 weight poly. So we're going to actually start out with fabric number 3. We are going to take it and we are going to cover this kind of tulip flower shape that we have right here. We're going to lay that over top of it, and we're going to cover all of the outside lines. They're kind of, you can kind of see them embossed into it. And then with the same threads, the regular embroidery bobbin and the regular top thread, we're going to sew down machine stitch step 4. That is just going to tack our flower down for us. Now, one thing that Hoop Sisters does recommend is leaving about 1/4 inch of the fabric outside. So if you're trimming close, that's okay. They do the 1/4 inch because that's your kind of like your standard quilt piecing seam allowance. So we're just going to trim that all the way around, roughly leaving about 1/4 inch. Like I said, if you're trimming close, that's okay, but I wouldn't get too close to the edges. About like I have it is fine, because we're going to be flipping and folding. So after you have done that, then you're going to want to go ahead and grab your fabric 1 fabrics. And we are going to start with the 3 smaller rectangles that we have. You have a great big one that's going to go on the bottom, but for the top pieces, we have these first 3 smaller ones. And we're going to begin our flip and folding. So we're going to start at the top here, and we're going to place this kind of roughly even with our previous raw edge line, and we're going to lay it over top of and it's going to flip over this top corner, and we're going to sew machine stitch step 5, which is just going to tack that down for us. And I'm also going to get a piece of embroidery tape out, because it is going to supersede beyond the hoop and it is not going to tack it down, and I don't like that, because I want to make sure it's held. You could also take your fabric folding pin right here and put it in the stitch and then flip it back and use your roll and press, again, if you have an issue with dexterity in your fingers. So I'm just going to tape that down though, just to keep it nice and held back for me as I work. And I'm not actually going to trim anything because it doesn't come into my other areas. If you've got like a bunch of overhang, you may want to, but if you're doing it the way the pattern recommends, it's not a necessity. So that was step 5. So again, we're going to repeat this process on the left side, the side closest for me, which will be away from me. And we are going to do the same thing. We're going to lay it roughly even with the raw edge of the previous stitch. We're going to hit start, and we're going to tack that down again with machine stitch step 6. And then we are going to flip it over. So let's flip it over. Let's finger press it down, or use your fabric folding pen and your roll and press or wood iron, whatever you're into. And then hit start again, and that's going to be machine stitch step 7. That one, ooh, came out of my needle. I swear sometimes when it cuts the threads in some of these designs, it always comes up out of my needle. It always does it to me at least once when I'm trying to record a video. I could sew all day if I wasn't recording, and I would never have any problems. Ah. Oh, it didn't catch. Oh no, that's weird. Okay, I'm gonna have to repeat this step, guys, so bear with me. It didn't catch my fabric, and I don't like that. So we are going to go repeat machine stitch step 7. So bear with me as I just switch my machine over to repeat this step. Like I said, all day, no problems, by myself. Record, problems all day. Okay, so once that is good and tacked down, again, you're going to leave about 1/4 inch. Just eye shot it. It doesn't have to be perfect. And just go all the way up the length of the hoop, kind of getting that flush. I'm going to kind of pull that down so you guys can see what I'm talking about. So see, I've got it just kind of like all the way down the length, but I've left like this excess on the outhang of it. Always leave your overhang alone because we're going to trim that all together at the end. And the reason we cut our batting is to remove the bulk for when we trim. Unless you're using the trimmer by George. And if you're using the trimmer by George, you're going to leave your batting alone and you're going to cut it off at the very butt end of it all. And that's a great method, especially if you're using the battleizer. So now we're going to take our last small background rectangle, our fabric 1 if you will. We're going to do the same thing here on the bottom. We're going to line this up roughly even with our previously sewn raw edge. We're going to smooth that out and we're going to hit start and we're going to sew machine stitch step 8, which is going to do our initial tack down of fabric number 1, our third piece. Okay? When I am doing that with that 1/4 inch trim, that's where it's leaving me like my other 1/4 inch right here. So like, again, like your average piece block. We're going to flip that down. We're going to finger press it or roll and press it, whatever you're feeling today. And then we're going to hit start again. And we are going to tack down with machine stitch step 9. Okay. Once that's tacked down, we're going to trim about 1/4 inch away on the lower side. Just extending again all the way down, but leaving the rest of the overhang be. Okay, so we're going to lock that into place. And now we're going to start working with our next piece of fabric. So I'm just trying to grab it real quick. I've got it kind of in a weird spot. Okay. So we are now on machine stitch step 10. So we are going to be working with our fabric number 2 strip. So it does have you cut this in just one big long strip. And I know it seems a little weird, but it works. So who cares, right? So we're actually going to be putting it over here on this piece. So what we're going to do real quick is we're just going to take and we're going to put the raw edge even with the raw edge of the previous lines. So you're going to have your orange and your white for me, which is your fabric 1 and your fabric 3. And you're going to take fabric 2 and put it over top of it. And you are going to sew machine stitch step 10, which is going to tack it down like we usually have been doing. Okay. And it does get a little oblong, and that's okay because the seams are going to be hidden because you're flipping it over in the same color. And then we're going to flip it down. And we're going to have to pay a little extra close attention to smoothing this because we do have that strip extending out down our hoop. So we're going to sew our next step, which is just going to be kind of the tack down line that's going to hold it and allow us to trim. Okay, perfect. So because I am in a corner and I've about finished this side, I'm going to add a couple of pieces of tape here. So here in a little bit, when it goes to do that outside tack down stitch, I don't have to worry about my foot catching my fabrics and everything's going to be held down nice and smooth. So now that I'm here, let me turn my camera a little bit. I'm going to trim just relatively close, about 1/4 inch away from the sewn line. Now I'm going to kind of rotate my fabric to where I've got like the longer piece right here. I'm going to take and I'm going to align it right about here. Shoot, let me get that. Going to align it right about here, just down the entire length of our previously sewn lines. So that's going to encompass fabric 1, fabric 2, and fabric 3. So this whole length. You're going to just take that, put the short edge at the top, the wider edge at the bottom, and we're going to sew machine stitch step 12, which is going to tack it down. Perfect. Fantastic. So now again, after this step is done, we are going to flip and fold like we've been doing. We're going to flip it over. Again, if you've got a fabric folding pen, a wood iron, or a rolling press, or all three, whatever you have on hand. If you have issues with the finger pressing, I do, again, recommend it. So you want to get it nice and smooth, and then you're going to stitch once again. Perfect. And I'm going to get this one random stray thread that came up. Okay, perfect. So now that I have all of that stitched down nice and smooth, again, you're going to take and you're going to trim about 1/4 of an inch away per Hoop Sisters recommendations. And then this is all about the scrap that you have left. So not a ton of waste. And I am, bear with me, getting a piece of tape to put a piece of tape right there at the top to hold that down. And then I'm also probably going to come back here in a minute and put another piece here and here. We'll cover that in a moment. Now we're going to do our last piece of fabric addition, which is your remaining piece of fabric one, the nice big long rectangle. Again, you're going to put the raw edge of it even with the previous raw edge, which is just kind of running down the whole length of this fabric too. Kind of get it roughly even with your previous stitch line where we're going to have a little bit of overhang. So I'm just kind of centering it real quick and smoothing it down. And then we're going to stitch it down. And a lot of people, like while we're here, ask me, how do I know which side of a batik is right? I look at it, I pick one, and I go with it. That's all the thought I put into it for right, wrong sides of batiks. I really can't tell the difference most times, so I feel like I've got a true double-sided fabric, which makes batiks super easy to work with. Alrighty, so now what we're going to do is we're going to flip this over once again. We're going to smooth it down, and I'm actually going to tuck this bottom piece under my hoop a little bit. So I am adding tape, more tape. I'm going to do one here in this bottom corner. I'm going to do one here over in this corner. I'm going to do one over here in the far side. And I think I'm going to put one right in here. I just do not want this to catch, okay? That's my whole prerogative. So now we are going to sew our tack down stitch that is going to go all the way around the block. That is going to be machine stitch step 15. So again, if you are working with the Vanish Light water soluble thread, you want to go ahead and switch now. So in the needle only, you are going to place water soluble stabilizer, okay? And if you are adding the additional optional back, you would go ahead and take the hoop off the machine. You'll flip it over to the back side. You'll tape it to where it covers all these outside stitch lines, and you'll tape it down well. Alrighty, so let's keep it going. Okay. And you would keep your regular bobbin in if you, no matter what you're doing, just regular embroidery bobbin for this step, no matter what method you're using. And I am hyper paranoid about it catching the fabrics. So I am watching that like a hawk. Okay, good. Good. Hyper vigilant. I could have had a little more overhang in the top corner over here. That's on me. I always try to leave a little more overhang than that, but here we are. Now, the one thing I like about this is that the way the colors fall, it's already ready to do the quilting step, so I don't have to change anything. But if you are doing the quilting and you do not having your quilting color, go ahead and switch to your quilting color now. So if you're doing like a navy blue, go ahead and switch to that. And if you are doing the optional backing, you'll want to put whatever thread you're using as your back quilting thread in the bobbin now as well. So optional back, change your bobbin. If you are doing a different color than your background color for your quilting, go ahead and switch that now. And that is machine stitch step 16. So we're going to hit start. We're going to go ahead and let it quilt out. I love the feathers that it does. It does do like a little weird thing here at the bottom. I'll kind of point that out here in a second. So we're going to let it quilt up here and then up here and here because everything goes nice and normal. So see right here on the bottom lower corner that we have this super cute stitched out stem and how it does this really nice heavy textured kind of almost weave like stitch. Well, it cuts the threads in here and then like skips over and like comes to a different spot. It's kind of odd. Like you would think it would like path itself out, but I think the reason it's cutting there is because it's trying to remove as many stitches from the underlay area as much as humanly possible anyway. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're working, okay? Like it made me think that like, did it miss stitches? No, it's not missing stitches. It's just kind of a heavy stitch that they're doing here, and they're trying to remove the underlay. So moving forward, if you're doing the additional optional back where you're quilting it as you go, Hoopsisters always does recommend switching your threads in the top and the bobbin to match the colors. So like where I'm doing the green stem, they recommend if you're wanting that to be on your back, go ahead and do that. But you can leave in the color that matches your back. That's entirely up to you guys how you want that to be quilted. Some people are skipping forward and doing the decorative stitching and then going back and adding the optional back. If you decide you want to do that, that is totally up to you. Little things like that are fine and dandy, but that's why I'm kind of like, I add the back at the very end, cut it as a whole cloth piece, and then just stitch in the ditch around that. That's part of the reason I like doing it. It's a lot less complicated to me in my brain, but you do you. There are a lot of options that you have, so I just like to point that out there. If you were going to do this and you want to do the optional quilted back, you'll want to have the colors that you want to be on your back wound into bobbins ready to go as you change steps. We're getting close to where I was talking about, like where it cuts and jumps, and I thought it was odd. And it threw me off because I was like, wait, what? Okay, right here. So it cuts the threads here. And then it moves like over here. And it made me think like something weird happened. But it comes back to it and it finishes the stitch out. So, you know, whatever. But I did think that was odd. But it's nothing to freak out about because it does come back and it finishes off the stitch. And it does tack it off so you don't have to worry about it coming undone. Now, one thing I'll mention is like we talk about how like you could probably skip forward and do the other decorative stitches first. One thing to keep in mind is that before you do the quilting and add the optional back is that some of the quilting may overlap over top of your decorative stitches. Like where there's some quilting that goes over top of that would go over this. So that's something to keep in mind. That some of your decorative stitching may be under the quilting if you do that, but that's neither here nor there, and you make your decisions based off what you like. So from this step moving forward is where you are going to go change your bobbin thread accordingly to what you want to have on the back for all of these upcoming decorative stitches if you're doing the additional optional back. So I've been using ES 165 through this whole thing, which is great because I didn't have to change a color a single time until the very last two steps, which I love. But now we are going to go ahead and we are going to switch to our green, which I am using Exquisite Color number 983. Bear with me as I get that changed around real fast. And that is going to stitch out the stem and the detailing in the leaves all at the same time. So if you are wanting to do those in different colors, you're going to have to figure out where to manually stop that yourself. And of course, again, once again, if you are doing this on the back and you wanted to switch to where the top and the bottom, the bobbin match one another, you want to do it now, I would probably leave it the same on my back. I'd probably do all my back colors the same, but that's, again, neither here nor there. That's my opinion. But it does this really, really nice heavy weave stitch in this stem, and I absolutely love it. This is probably the longest, this and the quilting are probably the longest steps through the whole project, but it's totally worth it because that stem really does something for this whole block. So I try to mention this every time. We are doing the 8-inch size. Its true hoop frame size is 7 3/4 by 7 3/4, and it has 18 steps, so 18 color changes. And the speed that I have it set to, it's going to take about 30 minutes to sew out, not including your trims, of course. And there's 7,192 stitches. So most of that stitching is going to be done during the quilting steps and during the stem stitch. So that does take the vast majority of your time. So I know according to what I have on my screen, this says that this step is going to take me 5 minutes to stitch out, which is pretty lengthy for an embroidery step. But as you can see, it did a run and it's done a very nice underlay, and now it's doing that real heavy, heavy step stitch right there. Also, if you are changing your bobbin thread to match your top thread, you're doing it like out of a regular embroidery thread or a sewing thread that's a very fine weight, like a 60 or an 80, they recommend to bring your bobbin thread up to the top when you're adding the optional back, especially if you're doing the wool. They do that because it's going to avoid thread nesting, and that is listed in their notes that they have for you in your instructions. So again, that's just really nice and handy. So you have both these videos and the instructions to help guide you along the path. Also, if you are doing the 4-patch layout, you will need to make 3 more of these when all of this one is done. So if you're doing the on point, of course, you need to just do 1 of these. So however you see fit, do your quilt layout. We do also already have all of oh my gosh, my brain. All the Butterfly Blocks videos are up and ready for all the people doing the on point. Those are there. There's several Butterfly Block videos, so definitely make sure you take your time and look through all of them if you're doing them, because there's different angles and importance of loading the design. And then there's also all the videos that have come previous to this, that are like block 1 through 4. I also have like a little brief video on how to use the trimmer by George Ruler. And I would highly recommend going and watching, if you have yet to watch the Gather Your Supplies video before you get started, things you need to know. So it just kind of talks about everything you're going to kind of need to have on hand to get ready for making your blocks in the hoop and before you get sewing. So I would highly recommend and going watching all of those, except the butterflies if you're not doing the on point layout. Before we get going, I also have a video on how to put your 4-patch blocks together for people that are doing the 4-patch layout. So while we're stitching, I just kind of want to make a mention that all those videos should be up and ready to watch for you as well. But I promise we're nearing the end of this. But yeah, I love that stem stitch. It's just such a nice, heavy textured, and I love that about some designers. They really put the detail into it. The Hoop Sisters is great for that, and I've done a lot of Smith Street stuff. They do a nice, heavy, decorative stitch on a lot of their stuff, and I really like a little more depth to it, and it just adds something. It adds something really nice. So now it's going to do the run stitch, so it's finished the stem, and like I said, if you're switching colors, you need to do it quick, because it goes from there to just trums right along. So it does a nice heavy back stitch through all of these that details those out really well. So you could do a darker green if you wanted to like pull the darker colors, whatever you're into. But to me, a stem needs to be green or maybe even like a light brownish color. But I try to keep it like in that family. That's just my preference. You could be like the My Little Pony. Instead of doing like real horse colors, you could do like fantasy colors. That would be cool. Now, one thing too is that I like to trim these at a 1/2 inch. I feel like it's easier to press the seams open. The pattern does recommend 1/4 inch, so neither is wrong, but do leave yourself at least 1/4 inch seam allowance whenever you go to trim this down. No matter what method you're using, you really need that at least 1/4 inch. But again, I like a 1/2, but who am I? Alrighty. So we're going to switch to our last color, which I am using the purple exquisite that I've been working with through the whole project, which is color 392. And we're going to go ahead and thread that up. Okay, let's thread that right there. Perfect. And then we're going to go ahead and hit start. And we're going to finish our last color, which is machine stitch step 18. And it's just going to do a nice little run stitch through the center of your actual flower block. I had initially anticipated doing orange, but again, we thought that was a little too matchy-matchy. So we did the purple because we've used this purple a lot in this block, and it just tied in really well with the whole quilt. All right, so now that we're done, you're just going to take this, unhoop it, take it over to your cutting station, and trim it as needed. I'll see you guys back for block 6. Thanks for joining us for block 5. We hope to see you soon, and I hope you're enjoying the series. Bye-bye.